Hoop, there it is. All right, now hoop, there it is. Okay, catching up, doing a little catch up here. Um, gonna hit you with the Boondocks video right now, and I think also the All in the Family video might be coming on the heels of this. So stay tuned, 10 people that watch these, because it's gonna be hot and heavy. Uh, Boondocks. The Boondocks came out. It was very good timing. I think it came out during my first year of teaching this course, and I'm like, oh man, this is just perfect. It's too perfect for what I'm trying to do here. Um, it's this animated show based on a long running comic strip of the same name with the same characters by the same dude. Aaron McGruder created the comic strip and then rolled that into the the series. The series is just fantastic, and you know, it's a testament to animation, I think, and how far that has come over the decades. That you know, he kind of saw this opportunity. I think the comics. There's only so much you can do with 3 panels in a comic strip, you know. So doing a series is like really let Magruder go, right, and say a lot of things that you know that he wanted to say about specifically race. I mean, obviously, this is a this is this is the pilot that we watched. The Garden Party is the pilot episode. It's like this is gonna be a show about race, and it's gonna get thorough with it. Um, and the pilot episode points to that, as pilot episodes are wont to do. Um, but it's interesting to watch, if you watch the whole series, is how these theories and discussions and criticisms develop over time. Um, and many of you mentioned in your comments, like, well, first of all, many of you said this is an old show. It started in 2005, dude. Like, we've been watching shows from like the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, and you're like, yeah, even though it's an old show, I'm like, this show is not old. But still, like, '05, yeah, I get it. It's 10 plus years old. Um, 16, I guess, if you want to be exact about it. Um, but it's sort of this precursor to Black Lives Matter and all the unrest that we're feeling now. I think Huey would be proud, right? I mean, in the pilot episode, he's calling for revolution. Like, he's calling for, you know, he's like, we're not done. Like, that's the line I keep going back to. He doesn't say that, but that's the feeling I get from this episode. Is this show is a rallying cry for the African American community, saying we're not done yet. The civil rights movement was great, and it got us, it moved us in the right direction, but for the most part, we were given concessions by, as Huey would call it, the white supremacist power structure. So we got to keep going. Um, they do a whole series of episodes about Obama being voted, winning the election, and that whole thing. And Huey's like indifferent to it. And everyone starts calling him a bad black person for not being like freaking out over Obama being put. It's really it's nuanced. Let's just put it that way. It's a nuanced look at race from within the community itself, which is, I mean, always welcome. So, Boondocks is, for me, from my point of view, it's as important a racial commentary as any in our culture. I think that it's a cartoon television show, comedy, like all those things. Like, people love to shit on all those things, right? Cartoons are silly and for kids. Television's the idiot box, and you know, comedy is stupid too. So how could it be about anything, right? So it fights those three battles, like, right up front, and wins. Like, it dispels those sentiments that cartoons, animation, television, and comedy can't at once be entertaining and enlightening, right? I think it has as much to say about race relations in this country as any lecture or paper or whatever, um, that you can find. So, so there. And you have just, I mean, it's down to the simple stuff, right? All the characters are named after civil rights um, activists. Huey P. Newton and Riley and Freeman and all these kinds of things. And Freeman um, all allude to black power advancement, like just that idea. So it's ingrained in it, kind of thing. Um, so just from the pilot, you see where this is headed, right? You have the extremes of Huey and Riley, the two kids. You know, Riley is the stereotypical black youth, urban youth, as they like to call it, right? Thug life. He's got the cornrows. Um, I mean, it's down to that kind of stuff. Cornrows versus afro. Like, I mean, that's emblematic of these two characters and what they represent, right? Um, so yeah, Riley's thug life. You know, he's he's pro R. Kelly. Like, they do a whole story arc with the R. Kelly shit, and he's in R. Kelly's corner. Um, and so he represents this type of blackness, and then, you know, Huey's at the other end, right? Well spoken, articulate, intelligent, activist, um, sort of diligent warrior, I guess. Um, and Robert, granddad, he represents kind of this old guard, kind of a Cosby esque character. Um, and I think one of the commentaries is that's what the civil rights produced, was like these model black citizens that had sort of, I mean, in a way, given up some of their blackness. Um, More about fitting in and assimilating than changing the the structure itself, if that makes any sense. And then, you know, you have Ruckus, and there's so many characters that develop over the course of the series too, that occupy all these different spaces on the spectrum of blackness, I guess. So you have this cultural generational clash that they establish right out the gate, right? Robert is old school, and the kids sort of represent this young African American aesthetic, right? And they don't see eye to eye, right? They're kind of like, not till the end of the episode do they give a little bit of perspective where they're like, I mean, I don't, granddad worked his life and spent his inheritance to get us a better life. Like they understand that part of it. But is it a better life to give up your who you are and your identity and your heritage and your, you know, like those are the things that are constantly at play with this show, almost every episode. Like those conflicts that we've talked about, like how much of myself do I have to give up? Well, Huey doesn't want to give up any, and Robert seems to have given up everything, right? Um, and yeah, a bunch of you were like, I get Fresh Prince vibes, I get Cosby vibes. Like, yeah, there's an element to that, right? The making a black family white, right? Robert sort of is a Cosby type figure, or a Huxtable type figure, Cosby Show type figure. Um, and the whole class issues, right? Moving into this white neighborhood. That's very much Fresh Prince. So, tip of the cap to those of you who, obviously made those connections. Um, so, Huey's dream, right? The show opens, the first scene is Huey dreaming that what he says has an impact, right? Like that alone, that's the first thing you see in this series, is this young black activist having a dream where everything he says elicits great change, right? And the white supremacist power structure freaks out. Their heads explode. They set themselves on fire. They're out of their minds. Like that. And then Robert wakes him up from it. You're having that dream where you might make white people riot again, aren't you? Right? So he's saying, Robert, that's the conflict. Robert saying, we already won the battle. Civil rights movement. Now we just put our heads down and right, enjoy the concessions that were given us by, you know, the those in power. And Huey's like, no, we're not done yet. Like they don't care about anything we have to say. They don't even see us as equals. They don't see us as people. Um, so that is such a perfect start to this series, and helps define these characters, right? So then they go to the actual, like his dream is coming true. He's living this dream, and the reality of it is everything he says, the rich white people applaud, right? No, he's so adorable, right? You're so articulate, you know, just completely patronizing these black kids, like especially Huey. Um, so the Huey's dream and Huey's character represents the, again, I keep saying it, but we're not done here. African Americans, we're not done. We don't we don't have equality. We aren't treated the same, right? Like we, we people point to the civil rights movement and say, but look at this. Like, no, those were concessions. Those were, all right, we've dealt with you. Here. Oh, you want, okay. You can vote now. And you can shit in the same bathroom as us. How's that? That's it. That's all you get. And Huey's like, no, we and rightfully so. And it ties in, they sort of further this line of a line of discourse when Onceler, the the rich white dude who basically owns the neighborhood, owns the subdivision, he's the banker or whatever, when he shows up at their house. And what does he ask Robert? I'll wait for you to answer. What does he ask? You're not gay or Muslim, right? That's it, or of Arab descent. That's all he cares about. He doesn't care that he's black. Why? Because he was he's from the group that gave the concessions of the civil rights movement. So he's like, he goes to snoop around and sniff around Robert and see what's going on. He doesn't care about his blackness. Blackness isn't a threat anymore. White America, we've dealt with you. Whereas in Huey's, Huey is skeptical, and Huey is like, you know, doesn't trust him, all that kind of stuff. Robert is a black man, but he's not a threat anymore. The new threats to the white supremacist power structure, again, that's Huey quote, are these new communities. Gay is the new black. I used to say that for years while teaching this. Now, of course, at the same time, Muslim is the new black in our culture. It's like those are the most imminent threats to the white supremacist power structure. These other, it's not women, right? We dealt with women. We dealt with African Americans. Now it's what's the next threat and how do we deal with that? So what if he was gay or Muslim? He would have ran him out of town. I think that's the point. And it deepens the show's point about we're not done, right? Huey thinks we should still be a threat to the Oncelers of the world. So yeah, gay Muslim is the new black. Well, if you're a gay Muslim, yeah, you're really gonna fuck some shit up for white America. But yeah, he's not concerned about Robert's blackness anymore. And he calls him later, you're old school. I like you, you're old school. Well, what does that mean? Robert doesn't take it poorly, but he totally means you're old school. You understand I'm the white guy, you're the black guy. Just do what I say. Stay in line. Don't cause any trouble. Right? Be the model minority, and we won't have any problem. Regardless of how much of yourself you have to give up as a result of that relationship. You're old school. You don't. What does he say? He calls him free man. Like there's all those little subtle sort of, I guess, I mean, for lack of a better term, microaggressions that he uses. And Robert's just like, yeah, oh, yeah. And Huey's like, fuck this shit. It also rolls in the whole sellout Uncle Tom thing that we talked about with the Cosby Show. That was a criticism of it. Like this type of, he's a sellout. Like he left his community for a better life. Some would say a whiter life, right? About being black enough. There's an Uncle Tom-ism sell out Uncle Tom type of stuff. There's an actual character named Tom who is basically white. I mean, he is Carlton on steroids, basically. um, to sort of, I think, deepen that discussion too. Um, so all this is going on. This is just one episode, you know. Um, Uncle Ruckus is, you know, my take on Uncle Ruckus is he is this living, he is racism incarnate, right? He's super dark, and a couple of you mentioned like the skin tones and how they use those to sort of represent different black identities, right? So the darkest, and he's ugly, and he's dark, and he's just popping up everywhere. Every episode, he'll just pop up out of nowhere, and he'll have some menial job, right? It'll be a janitor, or it'll be the, you know, here he's like the house, he's just the butler or whatever. Always. And like, to me, he is racism. Like, he is this living, he's racism incarnate. And it's ugly, it's loud, it's obnoxious, it's hurtful, and it's always there, lurking, just sort of in the shadows, no matter where you are. But I liked Peter. Someone talked about Ruckus as an Uncle Tom type character, hence the uncle part of his name. No relation. So Ruckus is such an interesting. They use him in such interesting ways, right? To the point where he claims that he's white, like he's that distance from his community. Right. Like, and I think a lot of it also has to do with that. Like, if you see something enough, you start to believe it, right? He believes that he is less than the white man, right? And how sort of when you indoctrinate this into a society, it's easy to start to buy into it or believe all the negative shit that you see and hear about your community and stuff like that. Talking down to black youth, I mentioned that out. The 80s was largely spent infantilizing black youth. Shows like Different Strokes and Webster, where white families adopt these underprivileged black kids and sort of infantilize them, basically. That's kind of what you're seeing here. The way the white people interact with Huey when he says these controversial things, they don't care. They just, oh, you're so adorable, like that kind of thing. I think it speaks against that as well. Wunsler's kid, who was in Iraq, he's got the big W medallion. You know what the W stands for, right? And this is the Bush administration, so it's not a coincidence that he's wearing that W, and that his dad says at the end of the episode, in 30 years, he'll be president of the United States, and he'll still be a fucking idiot. Like, there's 100% criticism of Bush and the sort of, what's the word? Consecration of power, is that right? No. And just how the world works. Like, because he's white and he's rich and he's my kid, he'll be the president. Won't make him any smarter or any better at it. You know? So he's definitely represents that. Huey even says, these people aren't worried about us. Like, that's something that this show stands for. Like, we don't want to murder all the white people, but we're not done, right? These people aren't worried about us. They're rich, they're white, they're just going to clap at everything. And who mentioned that? Was it Alex? Yes, Alex brought up. This ties in with Alex's comment about how tone deaf these people, white people, are in this episode, right? The white elite are privileged and tone deaf to everything that Huey represents or has to say. I think that's pretty accurate, right? And Alex talked about, how Robert wants the boys to tone down their blackness, right? To not be who they are, basically. And I think that's one of these threads that runs through what did the civil rights movement do, right? Yes, it granted us these, what I am calling concessions, but what it made was a lot of Robert Freemans who were content with the concessions, but as a byproduct, kind of was like, we fought the battle, now we just sort of recede into the night and just go about, just put our heads down and be, sort of pacify themselves, maybe. But that idea of having to tone down yourself, your identity, your blackness, your whateverness, is just a fucking bummer to have to go through that every day. Like, okay, what my situation am I going to be in today? And can I be 100% me? Can I be 50% me? Just having to do that every single day is exhausting and humiliating, I think. So, Alex, well done, Alex. Noah talked about the generational conflict that I mentioned in my little thing. It's supposed to be between Robert and the boys. Like, there's supposed to be this, this separation. Peter said the whole garden party itself gave him Get Out vibes. 100%. I think that's an astute connection to make. Just the whole, just patronizing of the community is, it's sort of scary and unfortunate, I guess. The thing is, like, go back to this again, like, no one's listening to Huey, and it's driving him crazy. Just listen to me. Jesus was black. That should offend you. That should, right? He wants some sort of, he's picking these fights, and no one gives a shit, Kevin's comment reminded me of this idea, right, that with comedy especially, and this is one of the beauties of it, they usually use exaggeration to the point of realization. I don't know if I mentioned it in class before, but the thing that's most exaggerated in a show or a movie or stand-up or whatever is usually the thing that most bothers the artist. That's the shit that's most fucked up that they're trying to illuminate. You're supposed to be like, wait, why is it exaggerating so much? Oh, that's where I should look further, and see what point they're trying to make by using this example or exaggerating these characteristics or things like that. And I think Ruckus is case in point. Like, he's so ridiculously racist, right? You're supposed to be like, oh, that's too much. You're like, oh, well, racism's kind of too much. And then Sean talked about how the show amplifies black culture, which I thought was an interesting side note to the whole series itself, right? And it ties in with Arlie's analysis of the music in the episode, where they're listening to improvisational jazz in the car together, and they get out and they hear this European classical music, and just sort of like how the music, at least in this first episode, but I think it's used, the African American culture is used in that kind of subtle way, right? To make, to amplify black culture and to show its impact on American culture as a whole, and to make subtle notes about, these relationships and things like that. So Arlie and Sean's characters or comments came together there. And I'll leave you with this. Jack's comment just made me think of this idea. Equality to Robert means fitting in and assimilating, and sort of like, we made the waves already. Now I don't want to make any more waves, like that kind of thing. But equality to Huey means not apologizing for being who he is, which is black, right? And yeah, Robert seems to be embarrassed of them, right? And he would say, yeah, equality to Robert means fitting in. Equality to the boys, at least, or Huey more specifically, means not apologizing for being himself and believing the things he believes, and working for change. That's what equality is. Not apologizing for being black. So do with that what you will, my friends. And I'll do another video probably after this one. Yeah, buddy.